getting all started up here. Hello, everybody that is starting in or just about to come in. Hope you are all staying nice and dry on this rainy and cloudy day. It is a great day for our plants, but sometimes not a great day for us, especially, with some of the shade and some of the cloud cover. It may not be the most conducive to a cheerful attitude, but anyway, like to kind of start off by saying that if you were at all part of this live, I would say maybe later last night, earlier this morning. I do apologize for any, for lack of better words, degenerates that were posting or putting in any unsavory images. So again, we do apologize for that, and we're going to do our best to make sure nothing like that really does happen again. But anyway, enough about that. Time to get into some of the good stuff here. Today's class is all about ground covers. Now, this is, again, like a lot of our classes, we try and give these broad topics and then kind of narrow in and try and be specific as possible as far as what we need and what we're looking for as a ground cover. So the term ground cover really can be, like I mentioned, a very broad and general objective term to refer to anything that obviously is covering the ground. And now this isn't just limited to plants in general. It could be something synthetic, could be something plastic like a weed barrier. It could be something that you are just laying down like a mulch. It could be, turf grass. And then, of course, it can be some plants as well. And some of these plants, they can be, herbaceous and perennial, like some of the ones I have here on display that I will be showing you guys, and some of them can even be more like shrubs, woody shrubs, and even some great natives that we can talk about. But to kind of get that first area out of the way with things that aren't plant related, I did mention that you can technically call mulch or weed barriers a ground cover. And the purpose of ground covers is to, number one, cover up something that you're not particularly fond of looking at, like just bare dirt, bare soil, or if there's a ton of weeds there that you're trying to get rid of. Ground covers are a really great way of helping that without having to spray or apply any type of chemical, anything toxic, really anything that you could incorporate into the soil that would not be volatile and have a good half-life in there. So weed barrier is always something that we see around here that people are interested in putting down to, of course, stop the weeds and to give you a very aesthetically pleasing, just symmetrical, both shape and feel to the entire landscape. Now, these can be found a lot at up here at nurseries, as well as Tractor Supplies, other box stores. But that's where you'd find that weed fabric, and a lot of people like to plant in the weed fabric, which can or cannot be a good idea depending on the plant, and that's something we can, of course, delve into later if there's any questions about. But that is our first kind of ground cover. Are again things that aren't plants. They can be weed barrier. And then they can be mulch as well. Mulch is another really nice, aesthetically pleasing, symmetrical substance that you can put on the top of the soil to either cover up weeds, cover up the bare soil, and give you a nice, clean look. And now mulches come in a bunch of different sizes, shapes, and figures. Sometimes you could buy them in bulk. Those would be your landscape suppliers would always carry the mulch in bulk, of course. And then there's bagged mulch that you can see pretty much anywhere that someone's selling plants or landscaping materials. You do want to be careful when you're buying mulch. Sometimes the really cheap stuff can be dyed certain colors to, again, give you a really good look, but a lot of times that dye may leach into the soil, and it's not something that you're looking for. So there we go, kind of pushing that stuff out of the way, all the synthetic, or I'm also happy that you're here to learn as well. Yep, got the non-GMO seed. Sorry, I'm just now seeing these comments here. But just getting all that out of the way. We're getting rid of the weed fabric, getting rid of the mulch. Now we can start talking about plants. So earlier, I had kind of categorized this into two types of little plant categories. You have your herbaceous, fleshy, kind of less woody plants that can cover the ground. And then, of course, like I said, you have your shrubs and other woodies that you can plant to cover the ground as well. I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about more of this herbaceous stuff, just because there's a lot more options, at least around here, for that. So let us start by talking about those herbaceous things and really starting to delve into sun versus shade. Works in shade under a ponderosa pine. Cindy, I will get to your question here shortly. The short answer is that Oregon grape holly, the compact form, really works well underneath pines. It is more of a woody plant and definitely loves the shade, but I'll give you a couple options here as well. So, again, herbaceous. We'll start with the shade stuff. I keep showing the camera this one right here. This is a plant called Gallium odoratum, or a lot of people know it as sweet woodruff. Now, sweet woodruff is technically an edible plant as well. It's used a lot in European flavorings. Like here in America, we have green apple as the candy flavor of choice for things that are green, or lime. And a lot of times in Europe, they will be sweet woodruff flavored for green candies and things like that. So, it is edible, which is nice. I wouldn't necessarily suggest taking a huge bite of it, but I have in the past, and after a while it tastes like licorice. But this is through and through a shade plant. Gallium is really, really great as far as spreading on the ground. If it's given a fairly shady or a full shade location, it will do fairly well. Again, if something's full shade and gets absolutely no light throughout the day whatsoever, even if that's just slight indirect, a plant cannot grow in absolute shade. But if you do have a little bit of light, an hour or two, or again, a bright indirect all day, you might have some luck with some of these plants. But going back to this Gallium odoratum, the sweet woodruff, it is a really nice ground cover, spreads very well, and again, that part shade area has some nice white flowers, and any of the shade perennials, these ground covers, are going to like a little bit more water, but as we've talked about here in classes in the past, and as I will tell you again, everything is going to need to dry out a little bit in between waterings. You don't want to keep things consistently wet and soggy. That can never help you out unless it is something like a cottonwood, willow, or something that will absolutely need water all the time. And not a lot of people have water plants, but those would be another exception. But anyway, that is our sweet woodruff, the Gallium odoratum, little white flowers, spreads really well, great ground cover. That is something else that people look for in ground covers, is that ornamental value as well. So, starting off with the shade, that is always a good one. There's a couple other options that I did not have the chance to bring out with me here today. One is called Snow in the Mountains. Snow in the Mountains is an agapodium, yet another perennial ground cover. Those are going to have a variegated leaf, part green, part white, and they are extremely vigorous. They can actually grow a little bit taller as well as spread. I've seen those get 8 to 12 inches tall and just take over certain areas. And that is another good point to bring up as well, is that some ground covers will be more vigorous and take over more area than others. So my friend Agapodium, the Snow in the Mountains, is not going to be as tame as your Gallium odoratum here, that sweet woodruff, which will spread very well, but it won't be as aggressive. And then the last really important shade perennial ground cover I want to talk about is going to be Ajuga. Ajuga reptans is a really nice ground covering shade perennial, purple leaves on it, purple flowers as well. Sometimes it can be evergreen throughout the winter, but it is a really great plant and takes shade very well, takes a little bit of sun, and is generally very well performing in our soils around here too. There are also options as far as, let's see, some annuals can be ground covers as well. Some things that are vining can be ground covers. Vinca minor is another really good kind of more viney-like ground cover. Some of them can be variegated, but they also have a cute little purple leaf, and they don't mind the water either. They spread very prolific. So, Kind of going through those options for those shade perennial ground covers one more time. I had my friend Gallium odораtum, the sweet woodruff, and we talked a little bit about the agapodium, the snow in the mountains. We also talked about ajuga, and then finally that vinca right there at the end, which is kind of viney as well. So those are going to be really great shade perennial ground covers, all those options I just mentioned. I'm going to jump into some of those more xeric or sun ground covers, and then I'll start to talk a little bit about more of our woodies as well. So, heading into the realm of sun, we're going to start talking about a lot more options. Now, I only have a couple here today. Again, I only have so much room on this table behind me, but I'd be more than happy to show you just a couple options that I've started out with. So, your sun ground covers can further be categorized into succulent, meaning that these leaves are all holding water and they are very fleshy. And your more broadleaf, which this is a bad example of a broadleaf, but this is a phlox. So let's start off with some of those succulent ground covers. The most commonly used one around here is going to be sedum. This is not a sedum, this is a delosperma. Delospermas are really, really great xeric sun ground covers. In fact, there may be a couple natives around here, but not for a while. I'd say there's natives to the country, but not into the Front Range itself. If you are looking for native plants that are ground covers that love sun, buckwheat is a fantastic one, as well as Antinaria, which is also called pussy toes, but both great native ground covers for the Front Range. Where is this located? The Front Range of Colorado, to answer one of those comments on the Facebook Live here. But anyway, to go kind of back to these succulent ground covers, Delosperma, which comes in a bunch of different colors, is also a plant select plant. Plant select plants are essentially bred and cultivated to do well in the Front Range in these kind of four corner states, to take a lot of that more sun, have more of an ornamental flower or shape, size, or color. But anyway, here, to go back to that Delosperma, this one is beautiful. It is not blooming right now, but there are many that still are. They can have anywhere from a yellow to pink to red to purple to orange flower on them, mostly those kind of hot colors. But it is a very xeric plant. I see those get overwatered more than anything else, and just a great plant overall. I believe I'm in the same zone. I believe you may be as well. We are generally considered to be a zone 5 around here in Fort Collins. If you go north some more, you might end up in a 4, and either more north than that, you might end up in a 3. But yes, we are, for all intents and purposes, a good zone 5 around here. Delosperma, succulent ground cover, very xeric, loves the sun, does not need a lot of water. Same thing with sedum, which is another widely planted succulent ground cover around here. Now to talk about more of our deciduous, which is kind of a broad term because a lot of these will not lose their leaves. But this is a ground cover phlox. This is not a garden phlox, which are very upright with large flowers. These are going to be, again, your ground cover phlox, which will have very pretty flowers. Some are pink, white, or a mix of the both. A mix of the both, a good example is going to be your candy striped phlox. But anyway, phlox is a great kind of less vigorous ground cover. It can spread out well, but it is not going to be extremely prolific and aggressive like a sedum would, or like the thyme I'm about to show you here in a second. Beautiful spring bloomer here. Every once in a while, what'll happen is it'll come back from winter and it'll look completely dead and brown, and all of a sudden, boom, it's green and you have a ton of flowers on it, which is just fantastic. Do you have a list of those genus names for shady ground covers? Tough to Google my phonetic attempts. I don't at the moment, but if you want to give the store a call, I can definitely give you that list a little bit later. And I'd be happy to also mention them again too. But going back to that phlox here, Great spring bloomer, not extremely aggressive, but definitely a good one for the sun. If it stays too wet or stays it's in too much shade, you might get some powdery mildew on it. It won't be as aggressive. Now that is a really good kind of more deciduous option for ground covers. Next one I'm going to talk about are different types of thyme. This one is a lemon thyme, which smells really wonderful. A lot of lemon scented things, lemon balm, lemon grass, lemon thyme, can all be good at keeping away mosquitoes. A fact. But I would say that definitely a great full sun, low water perennial. Now the lemon may not be as hardy as, say, the woolly thyme that we see around here, the mother of thyme, red creeping thyme. None of those would necessarily keep away mosquitoes or have a massive scent to them, but they are really good ground covers. Thyme is actually used quite a bit when people are looking for spaces in between pavers or flagstones. Thyme is always a good option because of these really small leaves, and once the roots are constricted, it's more, I would say, stunted growth allow for a really good area, like I said, in between flagstones or pavers, just to fill in and prevent erosion, help kind of cushion the area, and even lower the temperature as well. As plants respire, as ground covers and around concrete, they will do a pretty decent job trying to lower the temperature. But anyway, thyme. That one is just an example of one we have in our annual section that we sell as an herb, but a lot of time will be perennial around here and in a lot of our neighboring states. So, great perennial there. I want to talk about just a couple more of these full sun ground covers. In fact, there are companies like this one right here. These Jeepers Creepers are really good ground covers. Actually, our friends over on Shields have quite a few of these, but they are essentially bred and grown to be small, dwarf, and be able to take a lot of foot traffic and weight. These are also really good to put between pavers, and that is because, if I can kind of pull one out and show you here, they are in these little cells, and they are really nicely shaped and slotted to fit right where you want them, as far as, again, on sidewalks in between pavers, and these again have been bred to take a lot of foot traffic. This company, these Jeepers Creepers, are really fantastic, and if you are not one to take a bigger pot and divide them, these are also a good option. Now, I did mention that division of plants, which is something you can absolutely do. Thyme is a great example. There's another type of ground cover. It's a species of Veronica, which is another really great, again, ground cover, full sun. That one also can have little blushing purple to white flowers on it, but these can be divided. And what I mean by that is essentially taking the plant out of its pot. I'm going to use gallium as an example because I don't have a large version of the thyme here. But you can pull this out of the pot and then take different sections, slice off of that. And you can do that with some of these ground covers because as they vine out, as they start to spread, it's not all coming from one central point like a tree or shrub would. Excuse me, they're going to be rooting out as they grow. So in that way, you can divide them with minimal stress or stunting happening. But to kind of run through those wonderful sun ground covers again, we talked about some of our succulents, which would be the Delosperma, the sedum, both good options, as well as another one called Hens and Chicks, Semper Vivum or Vivum, depending how you like to say that. And then we started talking a little bit about those deciduous or more broadleaf ground covers with some of the phlox, some of the thyme. I'll show that phlox once again here. Really good one. Another one that looks very similar to phlox that also blooms in the spring is going to be some of your dianthus. Dianthus is also a carnation. The carnations you buy at the store or have the really fragrant scent are not the ones that are going to be the ground covers, but phlox and dianthus are really good, kind of more tame full sun ground covers. Another one called Marnardella is also the same, but I don't want to talk too much about that. Again, we talked again about thyme. Some of these Jeepers packs, these can be sun or shade, depending on what you're looking for. Really good. Again, take heavy foot traffic and a lot of weight in the same area. Back to that lemon thyme. I just love smelling this. Wonderful. Uh, and then I just briefly talked about, and I will revisit some of our native ground covers. Again, the Antenaria, the pussy toes, and the buckwheat, which is Aragonum, I believe, is the scientific name of that. But buckwheat and those pussy toes, the Antenaria, are really, really good xeric and native ground covers. We, I believe, carry quite a bit of the buckwheat at the moment. Antenaria can sometimes be hard to find, but it is, again, very prolific. So, shade. Shade is very important for our shade ground covers. If they are going to be in the sun, sometimes they won't grow as fast, sometimes they'll burn, and some can be more aggressive than others. We talked about that gallium, which has the little white flowers, spreads very well. Talked about the snow in the mountains, the agapodium, which again is very aggressive. The ajuga was the other one I mentioned for that, and the vinca. Just a couple really good and really strong growers that can tolerate that shade. There are, of course, many more, but I don't want to overwhelm at the moment. And then we talked about those sun ones again, the succulent versus the broadleaf and deciduous, and they also have really nice flowers as well. But I would say, based on kind of the choices that you have and areas that you want to fill, some of your shade ground covers are a lot of times going to be more of those cool colors, your blues, your purples, and your sun ground covers going to be those hot colors, the reds, the pinks, the orange, the yellow. A lot of those will they'll kind of tell you where they want to be based on some of the colors that they're presenting. So I would love to answer any more questions. I can go through whatever you guys would like. If you'd like me to revisit some of the things we already talked about, any last minute questions here about more options, or even watering for ground covers. Again, the shade ones and sun ones, I would use the very similar method with. Some shade ground covers can take more sun and more aggressive ground. Oh, I'm sorry. Some shade covers can take more water, and the more aggressive the ground cover is, the more water it will be able to take with little concern. That's because it's going to be rooting very fast and growing very well. And the more leaves and the more growth the plant has, the more, again, it's using up water, it's respiring and evaporating. So the more aggressive your ground cover is, the more you want to water it. A lot of people, oh, I have a question over here. What is a good ground cover that can stand up to heavy human foot traffic for gardens, bed, walkways? Fantastic question. I would refer back to some of these Jeepers Creepers, which is a great company that makes these 4-packs and sells. Many of them have been bred to take heavy foot traffic. But your times are really good at taking foot traffic, and so are some of the vinca. The vinca are very prolific for those areas. Again, your vinca is more your shade, heavy foot traffic area. Your thyme is more your heavy sun foot traffic area. But you can also do cover crops as well. Now, cover crops don't really take heavy foot traffic, but they can be used as seed to throw down to either prevent erosion from happening in the off season or to add nutrient into the soil as well. But I would say thyme for sun, and some of that vinca does really well for will lemon thyme choke out weeds. If it is happy enough and gets thick enough is what I would say. Those are going to be the best for, oh, if we come and do have something to sell. I do have much of this stuff to sell. I do. Nothing I've mentioned I really have a lack of, but lemon thyme will choke out weeds if it's thick enough. I would say that some of the other thyme would probably be more prolific and do a better job choking out weeds, but they definitely can. I have seen ajuga do a really good job of choking out weeds, but it's really those ground covers that will collapse and start growing on itself. Once you have a good just line, a matted down cover, anything is really going to be nice for that. And I would not, if I'm choking out weeds, do something like a succulent ground cover. A lot of those will grow very well, but they won't be aggressive enough to really shade out a lot of those newly germinated weeds. Yes, I have a ton to sell of all these different things. And then let's go back to this one up here. Replacing grass in a whole lawn, what I would do honestly is not put down one specific ground cover, but give you a bunch of different options and place them in different places again based on their aggressive versus more tame habit. A lot of your thymes, again, buckwheat, antineria, are going to be really good and aggressive. The Veronica as well, I can add into that category for taking up a lot of space that grass used to be, but remember that you're still going to have to water it to some degree. How to best control creeping Jenny. Interesting. That is actually, the Creeping Jenny is actually another ground cover, the Lisa Machia, one that is sold around here quite a bit for shade areas. It can get very thick, but what you can do for the Creeping Jenny is you can either try and pull it out as much as possible. There are also what you would call selective herbicides that you can put down. Some are organic, some are not. And again, organic based on some of either the chemical content or the legal status of what that word means in different countries, because it certainly does mean different things in different countries. Clover is another great one for replacing grass as well, if you're trying to do a more of a cover crop anyway. Ground covers to attract pollinators, great question. Anything that has a flower specifically that's going to be open. Open flowers are really great for pollinators because pollinators don't really care what color the flower is as much as they do about getting to the reproductive parts of it. There are certain colors that will attract certain pollinators, but overall, I would say your brightest colors and your most open flowers are going to be the best. And what I mean by that is if you think of a rose in your head as the multiple petals swirling in on each other, you can't really see or get to a lot of their reproductive parts, the stigma, the style, any of that. So the more open that flower is, the better it is for pollinators. Thyme is great. Again, the Delosperma that I have over here is great. Ajuga, I keep mentioning, is a really good one. They are in the mint family, so they attract different kinds of pollinators. I've seen a lot of good bees on those. And then again, some of your native pollinators are going to really love if you plant those native plants. The buckwheat, the antineria, while they don't flower for very long, will be really helpful for those native pollinators because it's not just honeybees. It can be, I mean, there's all kinds of mason bees, there's little flies, there are even, heck, some bats or moths that do a really good job pollinating. Heck, even if you have a kind of purplish to reddish kind of flower on the ground, a lot of beetles will pollinate those as well. Looking for a sunny hillside ground cover, do you have a favorite manzanita? I like the Panchito manzanita. It is a plant select one, and that is something else I would love to talk about are those more woody ground covers. Manzanita, as mentioned in the comment, is a great one. That one is of course going to be fairly native and is going to love the sun. It's also a broadleaf evergreen. That one has these small bell-shaped flowers that are great for some of our native pollinators as well. And then you have your three-leaf sumac as well, the Rus triloba, which is going to be a good one. And there's another Rus sumac. It's a low-grow sumac. I'm blanking on the species of that, but another really good one. Sumacs, while they are considered to be invasive and can definitely be invasive, are really great for places that have really dry areas, really full sun, and maybe even really high up in elevation, like Estes Park. So yeah, the manzanita is a good one. The sumac, that low grow sumac, are really nice. And to get kind of back into that vines, like we were talking about vinca, you have some of your euonymus. Euonymus are another broadleaf evergreen. It's more of a woody ground cover that likes the shade a little bit more preferably, but can take some sun. Again, very vigorous and does very well. But yes, my favorite manzanita is the Panchito manzanita. Wasps are another great pollinator. We have, yeah, a lot of native wasps that will love more of those open flowers on some of our native plants as well. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Anything that will deter wasps and spiders other than mint. As far as spiders go, there's not the way to deter spiders is to kind of get rid of their prey, which are going to be a lot of things that would either bite you, hurt, you or your family, as far as mosquitoes or flies, be a real nuisance. If you're able to get rid of their prey, that would be a very good way to go about that. Wasps are easily caught by traps, and you can kind of guess what they want based on what they're after. Wasps a lot of time will hang out in wet areas where algae has started to bloom, or they'll hang out near where there's a lot of honeydew, a lot of times underneath leaves that aphids have been eating on. They can also be present around different areas that are really woody and just kind of dense and sticks because they like to make their nests in big piles of kind of woody masses or sticks or logs, things like that. There are edible ground covers. So the Gallium odoratum, which I mentioned earlier, is definitely going to be one of those, as well as, let's see here, right off of the plant, there may not be as many edible options as more medicinally used options. Gallium's the only one that really I can think of off the top of my head that would be fairly safe to eat right off the plant. A lot of times blueberries can be a ground cover, but they can be difficult to grow around here, especially in some of our acidic soils. And then let us see here. Pretty much a lot of your other options are going to be herbs, but that is a great question there. And alrighty, got a couple more questions. Can berseem or lutrine be planted as an ornamental ground cover? To be honest, I am unaware of those two plants right there. I'm not ones that I've seen here at the nursery or have seen really growing around. Oh, the trifolium. It is a possibility to be growing those around here. Definitely is. Make sure that you get a species that is hardy to our zone. Alfalfa, yep. That is going to be a more of your cover crop, and absolutely it can be used as a ground cover, but I would definitely use it for not only its ornamental value, but also for adding nutrient back into the soil, because they can be really good at remediation as far as soil goes. So yep, just make sure that you have the correct zonage on those plants, and they can be used as an ornamental ground cover. Alrighty, I've pretty much talked about some of those herbaceous perennial ground covers, both sun and shade, some of the succulent ground covers in the sun. We went over just a couple of those woody ones. Manzanita's a good one, that low-growing sumac's a good one. There's also a cotoneaster, which is good at ground covers as well, but just know that if you do purchase a woody ground cover, it may get taller than a couple inches. Sometimes those can get 8, 10, 12 inches tall and fold over each other quite a bit, making a big kind of mass and mat, which can be great, especially if you're trying to cover up a ton of ground. But let's see here. Does anybody else have any questions about some of these ground covers? Again, I'd love to go into detail if someone had specific questions. Yeah, other than that, really broad category. There's a lot to talk about, more than I suppose I'd be able to get in one sitting here. But I'll wait a couple more seconds here in case anybody has any questions. But after that, I think we'll pretty much call it a wrap here. Deep shade and clay soils. Deep shade and clay soils. Deep shade, again, nothing is going to grow if there's absolutely no shade, but for some of those shady ground covers, we can go back to the vinca, we can go back to the ajuga, we can go back to the Agapodium, and then that other woody one I mentioned earlier, the Oregon Grape Holly, the Mahonia repens, is very prolific in the shade and has some really nice scented flowers, yellow in the spring. Thank you guys all. That said thank you there, much appreciated. We are 2079 South College Ave. 7029, sorry, I mixed that one up in my head. And yep, Fossil Creek Nursery, real South College, just south of Trilby, and almost to Loveland there. But I have pretty much all these options, of course, thank you. And what stands up to kids the best? Things that can take the most traffic. Again, those times, or some of these smaller, more bred to take traffic jeepers here. Also, if you plant some different kinds of like turf grasses, you could seed those in. You just want to make sure that they're well cared for. The thing about what stands up to kids the best is that even if there's a lot of traffic, you may have to aerate more, you may have to water a little bit more, and then you may have to rope areas off for certain periods of time so it can regenerate and do well. Peanuts is definitely an option as well. That's actually a really cool plant. I love the way the peanuts grow, kind of rooting into the ground and sprouting there. But they may not be hardy for this area. Although, to be honest with you, I haven't checked. That is more of an assumption I'm making. But I've never really seen anybody selling or growing peanuts in the Front Range of Colorado. But I suppose they definitely could be used for that purpose in a different zonage. But great question there. Listening in Orlando. Nice. Awesome. And if that is going to be it, guys, I think I will go ahead and sign off. If there's any more questions about this stuff, you can always call up the nursery here, or you can, message us through the website as well. But thank you all for coming in, and hope you all have a great day. Thanks for learning about ground covers with me.